Hi, I'm Ed Bacon, the rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, I hope that you'll find something here that speaks to you. Welcome. But it's really thrilling to have Angelica Salas with us. Before I introduce her, I want our Director of Peace and Justice, Francisco Garcia, to talk a little bit about our action today, just in case you have not stopped by the action table outside. We have an action table in here where you can do the same action. So, Brother Francisco, if you'll tell us a little bit about our action.
Sure. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Today's action is supporting the Trust Act, which is in the California legislature, and this would help separate the collaboration between local law enforcement and ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Right now, there's when ICE and local law enforcement collaborate, it really affects the ability of Latino communities and immigrant families and communities from reporting a crime and working on public safety issues because of the fear and risk of deportation. So the Trust Act, we have a fact sheet up there and letters that you can sign to our state legislative leaders, and I'm sure that Angelica will also address it in some way today. Thank you.
Thank you. Just remember, you haven't gone to church till you take some political action, if you ask me. Can I have an amen on that? All right, very good. Since becoming CHIRLA's executive director in 1999, Angelica Salas has spearheaded several ambitious campaigns locally, statewide, and nationally. She helped win in-state tuition for undocumented immigrant students and established day laborers' job centers that have served as a model for the rest of the nation. She led efforts to allow all California drivers to obtain a driver's license and is a leading spokesperson on federal immigration policy as an active member of FIRM and RIFA. Under her leadership, CHIRLA and its partners across the country have built the foundation for the recent upsurge in immigrant rights activism. As part of a national coordinating committee, Angelica helped convene a coalition of organizations in California which have successfully mobilized millions of immigrants to demand comprehensive immigration reform, including legalization with a path to citizenship, family reunification, and a protection of civil and labor rights. One of her greatest accomplishments has been the transformation of a coalition of social service providers into an organization that empowers immigrants to engage in advocacy on their own behalf. In this respect, she has blazed a pioneering trail among immigrant coalitions around the country and has propelled other immigrant rights to follow her lead. In March, she walked along thousands in the annual Selma to Montgomery March, something I hope to do very soon myself. She comes by her understanding of the immigrant experience firsthand. As a 5-year-old, Angelica came to the U.S. from Mexico to rejoin her parents, who had come to the U.S. to find work and better provide for their family. We have a person of great empowerment who can educate us to be more effective in our solidarity. Would you please warmly welcome our friend, Angelica Salas. Welcome.
First of all, I just want to begin by saying thank you so much to All Saints, because I've been here many times. And I've been here many times, and you've always received me warmly, and you've always done much to move forward immigration reform. And if we think we are this far in terms of if we know we are the closest we've ever been to passing comprehensive immigration reform, it has to do with the fact that this institution, this congregation, its people have stood with this issue for so long, and its leadership with Reverend Ed Bacon, Francisco, so many people that are too many to name in this institution have always been there for immigrants in Pasadena and throughout this nation. So I want to begin by saying thank you, thank you, thank you for everything you have done. So I'm here today to give you both an update about how are we doing on immigration reform, also to engage you on what we can do from this very place in order to move forward immigration reform, and then to also be open to the questions that you might have about this issue, because I always find that part of what is great about these forums is the back and forth, the questions, the comments that then make me a better advocate, a better worker for justice, because I am informed by your work. I just want to very briefly begin by telling you a little bit more about myself and about my organization and about the work we're doing, to also give us a little time back in terms of memory lane about California and where we have traveled in this state, and the things that we have been able to achieve, but also how much more we've got to do. And so just to state, this issue is very personal to me. I've shared this with many of you as I've come in the past, but it's very personal to me because I came to rejoin my parents, as was described earlier, and we all came to this country without legal status. My father, my mother, and my sister and I lived in this country in Pasadena, California, without papers, living in being undocumented. My mother worked in a garment factory. My father worked all sorts of different jobs, mostly construction. My father just passed away in December. The last thing that he did right before he passed away was continue working. He was a roofer, and many of the immigrants who come to this country work, and give so much of their bodies and their lives to this nation, to provide not only for their family, but to contribute to society. And in his honor, I definitely continue to do this work. So my mother and my father came here to provide for a better life for us. They couldn't do it in Mexico for various reasons. And they came here wanting to eventually reunite their family, and they did. And the manner in which they were able to reunite our family was by raising enough money so that we could be brought into the country, but not through a visa and not through the regular sort of channels, because they didn't exist for them. But what happened was that they came, they worked, always being afraid of immigration, and unfortunately also being caught up in the enforcement of this country. And when my mother, working as a garment worker, was picked up by immigration authorities at her place with my uncles and aunts and deported back to Mexico. And I remember this very vividly, and it is part of what I know happens to millions of families in this country. And she was sent back to Mexico. I was 11 years old, going to school here in Pasadena schools, and I remember how horrible my father felt because my mother had been taken away, and how hard and how anxiously hard he worked in order to make sure that she could come back. And I remember an uncle who was a U.S. citizen who lived in East Los Angeles, who came forward, and he was the one who was trying to work and figure it out as a U.S. citizen. And it was at that moment for me that I realized, wait a second, citizenship means something different. There's something like a lack of fear. He's helping, he's trying to figure this out, and yet without legal status, where do we stand? My family, my mother was able to come back again without legal status, came to this country in the trunk of a car, back again to be reunited with us. And I remember the pain in her face when she walked in the door, and the pain in her body from that journey. And there's so many individuals who are coming to this country who wish they could come with a visa, go through the airport, go through the points of entry, but who have no other choice but to come in this mode. And I want to tell you, today we have thousands and thousands of people who are not just coming in I would say, in this undignified way, which they wish they did not, but in a manner in which puts their life at peril. So that we have thousands and thousands of people who die all the time crossing our U.S.-Mexico border, the Caribbean, and coming from many Asian countries on cargo ships and other ways. These are individuals who are losing their lives because our our system is so broken. Our immigration system is so broken. And when I say this, I tell you their mothers, their fathers, their daughters and sons. And I want to tell you what I met one of those fathers, Cesario Dominguez, who lost his daughter at the Arizona-Mexico border. He was not going to let her die in vain, and he was not going to leave her remains in the desert. So he did, from Mexico, he did whatever he could in order to find the remains of his daughter in that desert. He spent over a month looking for her body, found many other bodies, but not hers, but kept looking. His story was captured in a newspaper, and what ended up happening with this man was that once he found her, he said, I don't want anybody else, any other father, any other mother to continue to go through this. What can I do? And when we were having this conversation, I said, tell your story, engage individuals, tell them what has happened. All he had was a ring. The way he was able to identify her body was a ring that he could, that remained in one of the bones because the body had been so desiccated. But he knew this was his daughter and then gave her a proper burial. So what he did was he joined me and he went with me to Washington, D.C., and we started knocking on doors. And one of those individuals who we knocked on doors was Congressman Adam Schiff, who used to represent this area. Now we have wonderful Congresswoman Judy Chu, but engaged with Congressman Adam Schiff, who was at that time, long ago, I would say many years ago, not as engaged on the issue of immigration. And what Cesario did was talked to him as a father and said, you have these wonderful children, your little girls, and I had a little girl who I loved just as much. And my daughter was coming to the United States because her husband was here. And en route was my daughter and my 2 grandchildren. My grandchildren survived. My daughter did not. We can't let this continue happen. And I saw these 2 men in this conversation, and I had the honor to witness this conversation. And at that point, I saw Congressman Adam Schiff just really say, no, things have to change. This can't happen. And this man has, since that time, been very supportive of immigration reform, and many of you have engaged him. But the reason I tell you the story, the reason I tell you my story and Cesario's story, is because it is about human beings. This fight for immigration reform is about family unity. It's about dignity. It's about being respected in the workplace. It's about living in a country and not living in the shadows, but living in the light and being fully embraced by the place where you are. So after all these years of lifting up these stories, of engaging elected officials, of moving forward real people and putting them in the limelight, what we've been able to do is, for the first time, move a comprehensive immigration reform package in Congress. Something that I personally have been working for over a decade and a half to get this bill taken seriously and to be fully considered by our elected representatives. And we are closer than ever. We have a Senate bill that has just passed the Senate Judiciary Committee on a bipartisan vote, 13 to 5. 13 votes in favor, and it was a bipartisan vote. And what that bill basically says is that the 11 million individuals who are currently living in this country will be given something that is called a registered provisional immigrant status, that you register to legalize your status in this country, and that for the next 10 years, you will be on this path and eventually become a legal permanent resident and a U.S. citizen. So the path to citizenship is very important, and we've fought for it for many years because we've had a lot of changes in immigration law for years and years and years, but they've always been on the restriction side, on the punishment side, on the how can we stop you from coming in, and how quickly can we get you out of this country. So for the first time, we have a piece of legislation that will provide a path to citizenship for the 11 million, that will also provide young people, immigrant youth, the opportunity to also pursue their dreams, to legalize their status in this country, and to be full members. It gives farm workers an opportunity to also legalize their status if they can show that they've worked in the fields now, in the past, are working in the fields now, and would continue to work in the fields for a particular amount of time in the future. It says, and this is very important to me, it says that we will try to have more worker visas for individuals. So if they're coming to work, and that is their purpose, excuse me, forgive me, I'm going to get some water there. But what it says is if they're coming to work in this country, that they can come in legally, in the front door, not the back door. And so it'll provide additional visas for low-wage workers in this country. Obviously, it's a compromise between the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and labor unions in this country. We want to make sure that workers in this country are protected, that wages in this country are protected. And so that matters a lot because we've only had about 5,000 worker visas for low-wage worker visas all these years. And yet we have 11 million undocumented people in this country. There's a real mismatch with those visas, and that matters a lot. And what it also does, it changes, it tries to make sure that our legal system, that currently is one of the most generous systems in this world, which is true, but it is not generous enough to allow families to reunite. And what it does, it says, yes, we have this system that allows families to reunite, to be together, but we can, and we are bringing in 1 million people a year. But those 1 million people who arrive this year have been waiting to get to this country for over 10, 15, 20 years. Why do we have these backlogs of families? And this impacts especially the Mexican community, the Chinese community, the Filipino community, because what happens is that these individuals have U.S. citizen family members who are petitioning for family, but yet the system is, when we talk about it so broken, it's deficient, because you're able to say as a U.S. citizen, as a legal permanent resident, I'm going to bring my family, I'm going to get them into this country. But if you live from countries like Mexico, the Philippines, China, you're in another system. You have a different kind of line, and those lines are 16 years, 20 years. For the Filipinos, almost close to 27 years to bring in your brother or sister. And it's just it's a system that brings in folks, but for certain peoples from certain parts of the world, it just takes way too long. So you have these really difficult choices, which is either you come in without legal status or you wait for all these years if you happen to be from these countries. And so the bill, what it does is it reworks this legal system and tries to reduce the backlog in 8 years. And so this matters so much because instead of waiting for these 20 plus years, you would be, in 8 years, the backlog of all those folks who've been trying to wait or get this visa would be able to get so in 8 years. And that is our hope, and that is what the policy says. Finally, there have been over 4 million deportations since 2002. In the last 4 years, we've had over 2 million deportations. Today, you're taking action on the Trust Act, and I'll tell you why this is so important in terms of deportations. Why do you think we're able to deport so many people, 2 million people in 4 years? That's a lot of brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers. How are we able to do that? Well, we're able to do that because ICE doesn't have enough, even though it's the largest enforcement body in this country, with billions and billions of dollars invested it through our tax dollars every year. $18 billion is going to enforcement our immigration laws. They state it's not enough. Even though we have thousands and thousands of agents knocking on people's doors, pulling them out in the middle of the morning, in the wee hours of the morning, because they pick people up at 4 and 5 in the morning, and they have investigators that follow you to work and school or wherever you are to try to get you. They say we don't have enough of these agents. And so what we need to also bring into our force law enforcement, local law enforcement, to do our work and to do our what is it they talk about, to expand our force and to expand our power. So that's happened all over this country to a program called Secure Communities. And so what happens is that you'll be driving, you'll have some interaction with the police, and many times, even though many agencies don't even want to participate in this, but when they take your fingerprints, if you have had an outstanding order of deportation, if you've had any interaction with immigration authorities, you get dinged, and the police is then the police department then chooses, because it doesn't require it, but chooses to be collaborative with ICE. And then ICE will send them through this note, through this computer system, says, you know what, hold this person for me. Even though they haven't been convicted, even though maybe what they were stopped for was something, a traffic violation or something more minimal than that, hold them in the jail cell for us right now, because we're going to go pick them up. And so we have thousands and thousands of people all over this country who have been detained in this way. In California, over 80,000 individuals have been deported in this manner. But think of places like Arizona and Alabama and Georgia and other places where you would not think that that you know very well that the situation is much more confrontational, and that certain local law agencies are actually proactively stopping individuals who look a certain way to then take them in. So California, what we're trying to do is to set the standard higher and say, with the California Trust Act, you've deported 2 million people and 2 million individuals, the vast majority workers, but you cannot use our local law enforcement to continue to get more of these individuals. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We don't need these kind of policies. And it also serves the administration and others as a wonderful PR tool, because if an individual is detained by the police, then they could put it down on their public relations record as, well, the individual that we detained and deported was had some kind of interaction with the police and therefore is criminal. What they don't tell you is that the vast majority of individuals who've been detained in this way never were convicted of any crime, were never, and if they were of any kind of violations, they're very minor violations. But in the newspaper, it's wonderful to say of these 2 million individuals, there was some interaction with the police. And we have Chief Sanchez here, Chief Beck in Los Angeles, that don't really want to have anything to do with this, but also need us to stand with them and to say, through the California Trust Act, there's a better way. So let's help them, let's stand with them so that we have real security, and our tax dollars are not further collaborating in the deportation of so many people. So thank you for making the Trust Act today part of your action. And back to immigration reform, but very connected to immigration reform. Part of so many people being deported, 4 million individuals since 2002, and 2 million in the last year, is this immigration reform bill. If it passes and we're able to protect it in its current form, what it will do is it will allow individuals who have U.S. citizen family members here in this country, it will allow them to finally reunite. So even individuals who've been deported can then make a claim that they have a U.S. citizen spouse, a wife, a husband, children, and can they come back to this country for the benefit of for the benefit of the family? Because there's nothing like reuniting your family. I'm gonna end both with just looking at the time, going back to my story and why this is so important. When my mother was able to come back, the laws were different at that time, and so my family, because of my brother who had been born and was a U.S. citizen, for his sake, in the early 80s, before even the 86 amnesty, for his sake, for his well-being, my family went to a nonprofit organization and said, for the sake of family unity, we're going to legalize your status. And that has made all the difference. So what we're petitioning through this part of the law is for the sake of all these U.S. citizen children, for the sake of all these U.S. citizen spouses, let's reunite these families. Let's create some redemption to this horrific law that has separated so many people. There's a lot we can do. Where we're at with immigration reform is that we have a bipartisan group working on legislation in the Senate. We have an equal group of 8 working in the House of Representatives. As I told you earlier, the law is not a perfect law in terms it's a law that helps. There's a lot of things that could be perfected, but we have to protect it. And so in the Senate, it's passed the Judiciary Committee. It'll now, this coming week and the week after, it'll probably begin on June 10th, so I want you to be very aware of this. There's going to be a debate on the floor of the Senate, and the debate is yes for immigration reform or no for immigration reform, or in order to get my vote, these are the kind of the amendments process that will give you my vote. We need to protect this. We need you to speak up. We need to have this bill come out of the Senate with a thunderous bipartisan support. And you can help by calling Senator Feinstein, because she is a key member of this group, by engaging Senator Boxer, but most importantly, by ensuring that those who you might know who are even outside of the state lift up their voices so that other senators can also stand up in favor of reform. Because Senator Boxer and Senator Feinstein, we know, are a yes vote. They've already told us they're a yes vote. What we want them to be is to be strong champions. And the way they can be strong champions is when they know all of California is behind them. So we need to say to them, good job, keep it going, protect this bill, especially protect the part of reuniting families of individuals who've been deported, because this is one of the places where it's the toughest. So we need to do that. We also need to make sure that in the House of Representatives, if everything goes right, we will have a bill come out of the Senate at the end of June. Immediately, we will then have action in the House of Representatives. So we're so close. Our president wants to have a bill that he can sign by the end of July, before the August recess. That's what he wants. I mean, that's the ideal, so that by September we would have a law that would probably go into effect in a couple of years but that's what he wants. And so the work is being pushed in such a way that at the end of June, we have all the action happening in the Senate floor, and we have a positive bipartisan strong result in the Senate. It goes to the House of Representatives, which is mostly controlled by Republicans. Well, it is controlled by Republicans, but where we need the Republicans to stand strong. And so we need to finish in the Senate, but here in California, we have 15 Republicans who can give us their yes vote. There's 2 that we think it'll take an act of God for them to support it, because they are an adversary, but we never give up on them, right? Rohrabacher and McClintock. But everybody else is open. And our job here in California is to engage our members of the Republican delegation to be courageous leaders and to stand in favor of reform. Most of the Democrats in California are a yes vote because they have been a yes vote for many, many years. We have 2 new members of the Democratic caucus in San Diego that we need to make sure that they stand with us because they barely won by 500 votes and they're a little nervous. But that's Peters, but we want to make sure, especially Peters, that he's on board. But here, just in our backyard, these are the people. If you have any relationship with these individuals, it is crucial that you engage them. Gary Miller in Rancho Cucamonga, Ed Royce in Orange County, La Brea, Campbell in Irvine, and Buck McKeon, just over the 210 on the 5 in Valencia, Palmdale, that area, Buck McKeon. The most important member of the Republican Party in California is Kevin McCarthy in Bakersfield. He's the majority whip. He's the person who has to tell everybody how to vote, or at least gets them to vote. If in California, we need 218 votes in the United States Congress to get immigration reform passed. In California, we have 53 members of our congressional delegation. 2 are our senators, 2 yes votes. The question is, can we get the maximum number of the remaining 51 congressional votes in favor of immigration reform? And then the question for each one of you here is, do I know anybody who lives in these areas where House Republicans represent that can then move us forward on immigration reform? And so I want to ask you right now, and then we'll go right to questions because I know we're about to go into the next service, but I'm asking you right now, of the people that I mentioned, do any of you here have any relationship with individuals who live in those districts or the members themselves? Yes, one person. Tell me, and what area? Irvine. We need Campbell. You matter so much. If you know somebody in Irvine, if you are from Irvine, you need, and this is what it's a movement, is that everybody is necessary. Every single person. Because we don't know if what you can bring to this fight can actually help us get to that place where Representative Campbell will say yes for immigration reform. It boils down to human beings being courageous and casting a yes vote. So what you can do, and you've done so many times, is to continue to speak up. I actually made it really easy, and I brought some, maybe not enough, but I brought how you can help us. I tell you, how can you make calls? Well, there's a 1-800 number that'll patch you right through our senators or anybody else who needs to be convinced. There'll be a Father's Day Action for Reform to speak up of all the fathers who, on December 13th, because we want to speak of all the fathers who've been deported or are currently in detention and facing deportation, and why we need immigration reform so desperately. There's a request for donation. We have families that are going all the time to Washington, D.C., so that they can be in the hearing rooms, so they can be present and witness what is moving forward on immigration reform, so that they can speak up on their own behalf. Just last week, we had a meeting with our members from Chirla, 2 of our youth leaders who have been working years and years and years on immigration reform, and they were part of a delegation of 8 that met with President Obama and Vice President Biden to tell them their story, just like I described you Cesario Dominguez's story with Adam Schiff. Well, they were able to share their story about their families with President Obama. And the way we're able to do that is to get them to Washington, D.C., so support that as well. So I conclude by saying we are very close, but not yet there, and I need your help. So whatever you can do from All Saints to move us forward, the calls, organize the calls, engage in delegations, think about these representatives, whatever you can do is so welcome and so necessary. And so I thank you once more for having me in this wonderful place of worship, this wonderful place of action, and know that while I'm a Catholic, this is one of my favorite. This is my other religious home here in Pasadena. Thank you again, and really appreciate your time.
Wonderful. Stay right there. So we want to engage Angelica, please, with questions. Anybody who has a question, up there, Dennis, way up there, right there. Raise your hand, and we want to get a microphone to you. You don't have to turn it on. We've got it controlled up here. Okay, first question, please, Justin.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here and sharing the efforts of your movement, And I guess I have mixed feelings. As an African American whose great-grandparents were not citizens until the constitutional amendment to make that happen, and after Reconstruction or during Reconstruction, I know that my ancestors were laborers, doing field work and feeding early America. And I know that this issue has been laden with racism in the past and currently. I know that the issue has been just very confused in terms of not having enough information, at least for me, to fully understand which way I should go on it. So my question is, as an American who understands that, should I look towards immigration reform that seeks to perhaps move America forward in terms of our skill base and make sure that everyone who comes to the United States legally, is going to move our country forward in terms of what skills they bring? Or should I look towards immigration reform that recognizes our contiguous nations like Mexico and Canada and say maybe we should be an American Union and think about how people should be able to move freely across borders? I haven't had enough education about foreign policy and about what's most beneficial to our economy, as well as understanding the Christian ethic behind, truly caring for our brothers and sisters. So I'm just mixed. I just have mixed emotions. I'm curious to know how much Chirla has addressed the issue of looking at the European Union as a model for freedom of movement of peoples between Mexico and the United States.
Thank you for your question. My hope is that conversation that you have put forward about, well, how is it that commodities and goods are able to freely flow in this global economy, but the laborers, the people who actually either create the product or who are laboring, are really restricted from travel? I believe that moving forward, our domestic policy on immigration reform right now can create an openness to be more global in our perspective around migration, because we're not the only country dealing with this issue. Obviously, Europe is having much, I would say many of the same issues from the diaspora from African nations and from other Asian countries into Europe, and so we work with each other. Actually, there is a global movement. I participate in the Global Forum on Migration and Development, in which we discuss these issues. What they tell me is the following: in order for us to advance this global conversation on migration, the United States has to lead. And getting immigration reform done domestically and demonstrating that there is a different way than what we have in the past, which is laws that are punitive, are restrictive, and seal borders. Can we actually have something that recognizes this immigrant worker as a fundamental part of our movement forward? And this will help us. And so what I believe in terms of this, and I'd love to answer even more in depth your questions, what I know is if we can move immigration reform in this country, all of a sudden the conversation will open up, and they're going to, wait, let's look at the foreign policy issues that drive migration. Let's look at the environmental issues that are creating catastrophes and driving migration. But without moving this piece forward, the rest can't be had, which is, I think, more going to the root of our issues. So I think this policy gets us closer. It doesn't get us all the way, but it definitely gets us closer.
Another question? Okay. And here's one here, too. Dennis, can you bring the mic to... Okay.
Thank you very much. The latest I've heard on this discussion, especially in the House, is that the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, is threatening to create their own bill that will be a piecemeal bill rather than a comprehensive reform bill. I wonder if you could speak to that and what kind of offensive your organization and we should be making.
Mm-hmm. So the negotiations, this bipartisan group in the House of Representatives, of which Congressman Becerra here in Los Angeles and Zoe Logfrin from up in San Jose are a part of, they're still negotiating, and they're going to be coming back next week, and they have what I would say their final 2 sessions. My hope and what we've been pushing for is that Congresswoman Pelosi and Boehner give this group of people a chance to finish their work. Already there are bills that are that I would say are piecemeal, because the chairman of the Judiciary Committee and Goodlatte in the House of Representatives has already submitted these piecemeal pieces. What happens is that when you put these piecemeal pieces, it doesn't have legalization. It doesn't have any focus on the 11 million. We need to have a brokered agreement in the House of Representatives that gives the Republicans some of what they want, but gives the Democrats what they want, which is a path to citizenship. And so we have 2 days. Next week is very crucial in the House of Representatives, but if that breaks down, we are going to have to push definitely push on Boehner. But once again, I bring you back to California. We have to push on Kevin McCarthy, because he needs to feel the pressure here. So if that breaks down, what you're going to do, that number that I gave you, the 1877 number that you just saw, is going to be geared towards Kevin McCarthy, so that we can then drive those calls and get the Republican Party to just be better negotiators in this process.
Last question.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the deportations recently have increased significantly. But going back a while, going back a ways, there was very little enforcement. It seems to me, generally speaking, there was zero enforcement against employers. And when you put those two together, my sense of how I view what you call undocumented and people who don't have legal status, which lots of people call illegal, as kind of constructively having been invited to come to this country. We said to them, if you come and you can endure and get through all of the ordeal and the suffering of crossing the border, come in, there's a job for you. There'll be very little harassment. That's changed, I recognize, but that's been changed for political reasons recently. And we definitely don't go after employers. So I see these people as somewhere between invited guests and people who are really illegal. And I never hear that point of view expressed. Maybe it's because it has little or no merit. But I'm just curious about your reaction.
Well, I want to say the first. I think it is the observation of what reality looks like, or had looked like prior to the increase in deportation. So number one, we had employer sanctions that stated in 86, right? Like, we're going to punish you if you hire the undocumented. So then what employers did is, well, we are going to remove ourselves from liability by hiring, 10 contractors under us, so that these are the ones who actually are responsible for employment, and we shield ourselves from this employer liability. What that resulted in was exploitation of the worst kind, because then this subcontractor of that subcontractor to that subcontractor had no responsibility to the workers and to their wages. And that's why you have, companies like Gap and Walmart and all these folks who say we have no responsibility for these workers getting paid, less than minimum wage. It's this company or that company which we hired. They're the ones who are responsible. That's what actually occurred. And so then, and I want you to, we'll have more time in the future, but 1996 is what really we're dealing with, not 86 and employer sanctions. I want to say employer sanctions is a problem because it basically diminishes the power of workers, as I've described. But 1996 was a whole immigration reform happened, but it happened in this horrible way, which basically took away the ability of workers to legalize their status in this country, even though they qualified under our system, by punishing them and by giving them, even if they got a point where they could petition for a family member, making them wait 3 and 10 years more as a punishment, or just negating their ability to ever legalize their status in this country. And so what happened is you balloon the undocumented to such a level that then you can also, that they become, first of all, numerous, to so many undocumented. In 86, we legalized 2.7 million people. Today, it's 11 million. People don't understand. How did that come to be? Well, it came to be because we created barriers. We created gates from any legalization. For what purpose? So that people would be more vulnerable in the workplace, so that they couldn't speak up, so that there could be a competition globally in the global economic market around wages. And so that many politicians could continue to keep their job by having somebody to blame without voice, without power in the politics. So that every single politician, including here in California, remember Proposition 187, we kind of started it here, and then in Arizona, Jan Brewer, etc., that they can actually create a scapegoat for all economic issues, because those individuals cannot fight back. So when you say, are they invited guests? Well, they're invited to work, but at the same time, they are completely marginalized and completely scapegoated in order to always have a group of people that you can actually point the finger to as to why we have economic woes, social woes, etc. So it's very convenient for certain economic purposes, and it's very convenient for certain political motives as well.
Thank you, Angelica Salas.
Thank you.